extremist groups on the far right and the far left.
During an international forum on the Holocaust, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau grouped the far left in with the far right. Watch this.
We're in a time right now where around the world we see an increase of polarization, of extremism, of radicalization everywhere, including in some of the most open liberal democracies in the world. In our elections, in our public discourse, and in mainstream communications, let alone social media, we're seeing a rise in intolerance. We see the organizations of extremist groups on the far right and the far left that are pushing white supremacy, intolerance, radicalization, promoting hatred, fear, and mistrust across borders, but within borders as well. We need to understand that this divisiveness that has come about as a result of globalization, of crises, of challenges, of so many different factors, indeed, the access to information that we have through the internet and therefore to misinformation and disinformation has real life consequences that we need to address as governments and as societies.
All right. So first here, credit to Michael Buchert for sharing this clip on Twitter. And in a bit, I'll get to his thoughts on this as well. And I'll also get to the potential implications of this, as well as other online reactions to this clip. But first, Trudeau here, conflating the far left with the far right in such a dishonest way that, I mean, this is what you expect from liberals. I don't know why he's doing this, but I can speculate. For one, it benefits him as a liberal to try and paint both sides as the same, when in reality, you have one side fighting for things like universal programs like healthcare, pharmacare, the other side fighting to keep out immigrants. Mixing those two together as if they're equally the same is so completely ridiculous. But I also think maybe he's doing this as an attempt to paint anti-apartheid protesters as people that are filled with hate or even somehow white supremacists. And in the process, he's tying the Jewish identity to the far right-wing Israeli government, which in itself can be seen as anti-Semitic. Tying being Jewish to the Israeli government is ridiculous. Those two things are not connected. You can separate, you can criticize the far right-wing Israeli government's actions and how they have treated Palestinians and their human rights abuses, and be able to separate that from the Jewish identity. But Trudeau here conflating the two. Now, let me get to first Michael Buchert's thoughts on this, and apologies if I say his last name wrong. I'm never quite sure with anyone's last name. But here he tweets out, not only does this minimize the real threat of white supremacist violence, but it raises a red flag about who the government will be targeting with anti-hate initiatives. More on that in a second. Exactly what far-left extremist groups is he talking about? Antifa, BLM, Palestinians? Going on to say here, it's horrific that the Canadian government is literally conflating white supremacist violence with the very targets of that violence. This is a real threat to anti-racist, anti-fascist, and anti-apartheid organizing. And on that point, so he mentioned there the anti-hate initiatives. This happened at the beginning of the year, and I covered this. Canada adds Proud Boys to terror list, bring range of legal financial implications. Now, if you watch my video on this, I break down the positive aspects of this, but also the potential worries of doing this, as it sort of lowers the bar in terms of what groups qualify as terrorist organizations. And the Anti-Hate Network at the time also shared these concerns, saying, we have previously expressed concern that the definition of a terrorist entity would have to change or the bar be lowered to list the Proud Boys on the basis that a loosened definition could be exploited to target Black, Indigenous people of color, or anti-racist groups in the future. And so they go on to say here, this morning, again, this is back in February, this morning, Minister Blair called us about the upcoming announcement, and in part to address that concern. He told us that based on the information they have, the Proud Boys more than meet the criteria to be designated a terrorist entity. So at the time, as Anti-Hate Network there discussed, there were worries that lowering the bar would then potentially group in other people who are definitely not terrorists into the terrorist list. And those concerns at the time were squashed by the minister at the time. But when you have Trudeau out here conflating the two in a speech like this, while it's not, government action in terms of listing, groups that are maybe Black, Indigenous, people of color groups into the same list, it's still putting forward this idea that may happen. When you conflate the far right and the far left as one and the same, as both white supremacists, as full of hate and rage and wanting to divide the country, then you are essentially saying that, yes, we view these two sides as the same, and maybe we will treat them the same when it comes to the legal implications of something like the terror list, which, by the way, just to be clear on what that means. So being added to the terror list makes it tougher for a variety of reasons, for legal and financial reasons. So tougher to make money or fundraise, can't cross the border if you're associated with the group, and also removes online content that is associated with the group. Now, let me get to some reactions online to that clip. So Ian McIntyre here, tweeting out, genuinely curious which far left protesters Trudeau thinks are equally as bad as far right white supremacists, BLM, Antifa, Indigenous activists trying to keep pipelines off their land. Mark Gray here saying Nazis, white people are superior. Radical leftists saying no, they're not. Justin Trudeau saying these two views are the same. Khadija Kaji tweeting out here, hello, Justin Trudeau. When you do this, you are equating those who are motivated by hate with those who are motivated by justice, and inevitably the weight of law enforcement falls on the latter. Not cool. Brandon here saying, truly, people advocating teaching critical race theory and universal pharmacare are the same threat as literal Nazis who want to overthrow the government. Yeah, showing you how ridiculous that conflation is. Last tweet here from Kim Davidson saying, how are we going to fight disinformation when our own head of state is out there disinforming? Great question. So, yeah, when you have the Prime Minister out there, one of the voices saying we need to crack down on online disinformation. We need to ensure that people are educated by institutions that are putting out objectively factual information. Yet you have the Prime Minister in the same breath putting out misinformation, disinformation about the far left, conflating them, dropping them in with the right wing. It makes it tough to take you seriously.